It means if I set a boundary and I start to feel guilty, in the past, what I would do is use that guilt to mean I've done something wrong. I'm a bad person and I need to clean that up. And what I now understand is it's not an instruction. Guilt is not an instruction. Take back what you did. You've done something wrong. It's a feeling, typically way out of proportion, maybe even completely inappropriate to the situation, but it's because I'm changing my identity. I'm going from woman who helps everybody else at all costs at all times identity to I am woman who now is like, is this really working for me? Is this okay with me? Is this not okay with me? So that discomfort is the discomfort of growth. It's not the discomfort of dysfunction.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the What If You Could podcast. And I have such a great guest today. She just dropped into my universe at just the right time. And I'm going to say her name and she's going to correct me. But today's guest is Barb Nangle.
You said it, Barb Nangle. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, we're already starting out. Okay. Whew, I was freaking out. I was worried. So, guys, just so you know who we're playing with, I'm going to go ahead and read Barb's intro real quick and we'll get cooking. So, Barb is a boundaries coach, speaker, author, and host of the Fragments to Whole podcast. After nearly 40 years of therapy and personal development, she entered a 12-step recovery at age 52, where she discovered that the real issue wasn't a lack of insight, but a lack of internal safety. Learning to build healthy boundaries became the turning point that transformed her relationships, emotional availability, and sense of self. Today, Barb helps professional women stop overgiving, take themselves seriously, and build the internal safety needed for healthy, sustainable boundaries. And that is such great stuff. Gosh, do we need that in our planet, in our world, and for our
Uh-huh.
women? Can't wait to jump into that, Barb. But as I threatened earlier, we are the What If You Could podcast. So I ask all of my guests, Barb Nangle, what is your What If You Could?
I think now that I know all the things that I know, it would be what if I could have healthy relationships my entire life? And I don't just mean romantic, I mean all human relationships. Like, what if I could have done that my entire life? I can't even wrap my mind around what that would look like. But I will say that I can have healthy relationships now. So I'd love to for other people to ponder. What if you could have healthy relationships starting with yourself and then expanding out from there? I didn't know that I didn't have a good relationship with myself, even though I drank abusively until I was in my early 40s and I started smoking weed when I was like 14 and continued for decades after that. Secretly smoked cigarettes for 20 years, was in just tons of dysfunctional relationships and stuff and of romantic relationships. And then I learned actually my friendships weren't really that healthy either. So, what if you could love yourself, trust yourself, feel worthy, and then project that to the world so that you had healthy relationships? Well, guess what? You can, and it's never too late.
And that's why you're here, because
Yeah.
you're going to walk us through that. You're going to help us find that.
Mhm.
You know, w- gosh, we live in a world where it's so much easier to hide behind a mask and hide behind social media and run from your authentic self
Mhm.
that,
Speaking my language,
we
Gary. You speaking my language.
it just makes it so easy, right? But it's the physical abuse, the mental and physical abuse that we do to ourselves when we just don't love ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, agreed. But I didn't know that I didn't love myself. I really didn't. I didn't know that I didn't feel worthy. I'm pretty sure I liked myself. And then when I got into recovery, I realized I wasn't just this positive, optimistic, half glass, half full person, that I had a ton of negativity. I ruminated about the past. I catastrophized about the future. I beat the crap out of myself. I complained. I blamed. but I didn't even know that stuff was going on. Like, I knew I didn't trust myself, that I knew. I never really thought about whether I loved myself, and I think if you had asked me, "Do you feel like a worthy person?" I would have been like, "Oh, yeah. No, I didn't." Like, I look back, when I was going through the 12 steps of recovery and I really looked at my life and all of the patterns of my life, it was like, that is not the behavior of a woman who feels worthy. Worthy women don't drink abusively and smoke bales of weed and stay in and get in repeated dysfunctional relationships. You don't do that when you feel worthy.
There's you bring up safety so much. And when you think about safety and you think about children
Mhm.
and you think about the lack of safety in children and how they carry it with them forever and ever. But I mean, so many of us, oh my gosh, myself included, we get in these crash and burn missions and we repeatedly get into the same crash and burn missions. It's like we're Evil Knievel. We keep trying to jump the Snake River Canyon,
Mm,
and we know we're not gonna make we know we're not gonna get there, right? But we keep jumping
mm,
until we finally just you found a way to stop, right?
mhm.
Just stop.
Yeah, I did, and I'd love to tell you how that happened because it wasn't pretty.
Bring
Would
it.
you like to hear the story?
I would love to hear the story.
Yeah. So back in 2015, when I was 52, I hit what I call a codependent bottom. And in case people don't know what codependence is, good for you, because I didn't either, even though I had been in therapy starting at about age 15, so it was like, whatever, 37 years of therapy. I read a gajillion self-help books starting when I was like 22, 23. Had done like workshops and work groups and seminars and retreats and like all that stuff. And I hadn't heard this word codependent. So someone who is codependent is essentially entirely focused on everything outside of themselves. Like, what is he doing? What is she doing? What are they doing? What does he need? What does she need? What does the situation need? And they really neglect themselves because 'cause they're so focused outside that they're really not paying any attention to themselves and what they need, and, and they like, the classic codependent is in a relationship with an addict or an alcoholic. That doesn't have to be the case, but that's the classic. So what happened to help me hit this codependent bottom, Gary, is that I had started a leadership position at my church on a project serving homeless people. And right around that same time, this homeless guy named Dan started coming to my church as a parishioner. And he and I became very friendly. And I remember thinking it was like, oh, like God brought me this homeless person to kind of really help me understand the plight of homeless people from an individual perspective. So that when I started leading this project, I wasn't serving, quote, the homeless, but I was serving homeless people. And he was actually very, very helpful in that regard. Well, I probably 2 to 3 months into our friendship, we had a big, huge snowstorm here in New Haven, Connecticut, and I invited Dan to stay in my home, and I now know that it is not normal to invite a homeless person to stay in your home, and I did it because he never stayed in homeless shelters, but you cannot not stay in a homeless shelter when there's a massive snowstorm. And so, of course, he said yes, and he stayed at my home, and then I invited him another time, and then within a few weeks, he was practically living with me, and I soon felt trapped in my own home. This guy messed with my head in a way I had never experienced. So he was a self-admitted alcoholic and addict. I now, looking back, think he had some kind of personality disorder because he really made me question myself, my integrity, my reality, and all that. And so I'm in therapy one day, I'm talking about Dan, and mid-sentence, I go to my therapist, "Do you think I need to go to Al-Anon?" And my therapist says, "Yes." So just in case your listeners aren't familiar with Al-Anon, it is a 12-step recovery program for the loved ones of alcoholics. So if you're not familiar with 12-step recovery, you've probably heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, or AA, and that was the first 12-step recovery program ever created in the 1930s in the United States. And it was the first time in history that droves and droves and droves of alcoholics got and stayed sober, and it was documented. Well, the second 12-step recovery program, now there's 200 and something, but the second one was Al Anon, or Al Anon family programs, and it was for the loved ones of alcoholics. And so people often wonder, why do the loved ones of alcoholics need a recovery program? And it's because alcoholism is actually a family disease. We tend to think of the drinking behavior of the alcoholic as being the problem. It's actually the pinnacle of the symptoms of alcoholism. But what happens in alcoholic families is that the loved ones around the alcoholic sort of naturally just try to get the loved one to stop drinking, to get into rehab, to go to detox, to go to meetings, and they start engaging in all these controlling behaviors. And then they get resentful of the alcoholic because, "Look at all that I'm doing for you, and you're not listening to me." And then the alcoholic feels controlled for some reason, and then they get resentful of the loved one who's trying to control them, and then they use that resentment and that person as an excuse to drink more, and it gets worse and worse. So I had heard of Al-Anon, and in fact, actually, Dan went to AA meetings. He went for coffee and a warm room, not to get sober, but he could spout the literature. So anyway, I go home, whatever I type into Google, the word codependent, I'm looking for Al-Anon, and the word codependent comes up, and I'm like, "Wait, what? What is this word?" And so there's a 12-step recovery program called Codependence Anonymous. So I was like, "All right, let me check it out." And I started going, and I immediately felt a sense of relief. I think in knowing that there's almost kind of like this syndrome that applies to me, that there's a recovery program, there's other people like me, there's a way to recover. And like in the first couple weeks, I said to somebody after getting exposed to Codependence Anonymous, I was like, I think I need to be reparented. But Gary, I have no idea where I got that phrase from because I think I thought I made it up.
What wait, what was the phrase that you just said?
Reparented. I think I need to be reparented. So I will
Reparented.
elaborate. Yeah.
Reparented.
So, about 6 weeks into going to CODA, I went up to Cape Cod, Massachusetts to visit these dear friends of mine, one of whom had been in AA for over 10 years at that point, and she had just raved about how utterly transformed her life was as a result of AA. So I was like, "You're gonna love this. I'm going to Codependence Anonymous." And she said, "Oh, that's great. Let's see if we can find a meeting for CODA while you're here and we'll go together." Well, she couldn't, but she found an ACA meeting, which I had heard of before that as ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics. One, never occurred to me, why do adult children of alcoholics need a program of recovery? Now we know because it's family disease. And B, I never occurred to me that I recovered, that I qualified. I don't identify as a child of an alcoholic. Well, I got there, and in the opening readings, they said, "We reparent ourselves." And I was like, "What?" And then they read the list of the 14 traits of an adult child, which is affectionately called the laundry list. And Heidi tells me I sobbed the whole meeting. I don't remember that, but I did buy the literature, came home to New Haven, Connecticut, and started going. I now know the name of the fellowship is actually Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. Now, for that, I qualify. So I started going to ACA, and then a few weeks after that, a ACA women's meeting started here in New Haven. I started going to that. I still go to that. And then a few weeks later, I started a small group with 3 other women where we worked through the ACA 12-step workbook. And I was just astonished to understand this. I was like, "Oh, this is root cause. This is what happened." So what happened is that I experienced intergenerational family dysfunction, which results in childhood trauma. And one of the results of trauma is that we develop codependence. And so for me, I think of my core wound is really trauma, but the way it manifested for me personally was codependence. And boundaries are the antidote to codependence. So I'm foreshadowing, like, to talk about eventually how I got to be where I am. Well, about a year into that, I was really experiencing massive, like, transformation, recovery, all that kind of stuff. I continued to go to CODA, but I just went to the meeting. I didn't do anything outside, whereas ACA, I was going to multiple meetings, doing the steps, doing the reading, blah, blah, blah. And then about a year into it, one of the women I was doing the 12 steps with had started sharing with us about her relationship with food. She was talking about her thinking and behavior around food. And I remember being aghast. And it wasn't being aghast at what she was doing, it was that she was talking about it because I did and thought those same things. So she started going to Overeaters Anonymous and then kind of sort of gently tried to get me to go with her. I went to a meeting and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm a compulsive overeater," which I didn't even know was a thing. So I joined Overeaters Anonymous. I decided to let go of Coda actually about 2 weeks before that, and that turned out I think of that as a higher powered moment because I went to Coda on Mondays. I let it go, and there was a meeting for OA downtown in New Haven on Monday nights. So God was like, "We need to open up your calendar for Mondays." And I'm now down over 100 pounds from my top weight. I've been at my goal weight for over 8 years. In that program, it's called abstinent, which would be equivalent to sober in an alcoholic program. And so I've been abstinent for over 10 years. And so for me, Gary, the 12 steps are where it's at. And I can talk about multiple transformations I've had in my life. But, I mentioned how I did all those decades of all that other work. And I think of all that other personal development and therapy and stuff that I did as having scratched the surface of the iceberg of my life, and recovery melted the iceberg of my life. So for me, the 12 steps are where it's at. I know that they're not for everybody, but I feel like they've really unlocked everything that I had been searching for my entire life to help me understand what happened. What have I been doing to metaphorically lob bombs into my own life? How do I stop doing it? And how do I start treating myself like a worthy woman of dignity and grace and build healthy relationships with other humans? So that's my quick, fast version of the backstory. I know, you're laughing.
That was a Reader's Digest version of your story. I happen to be very familiar with Overeaters Anonymous,
Okay.
and my wife is 22 years sober.
No kidding.
She was very involved with AA, and she doesn't mind me sharing that, of course. She's very proud of it.
As she should
I
be.
completely get about the children
Mhm.
of alcoholics.
Mhm.
It is a family disease because it can completely rip apart
God,
families
yeah.
and individuals and
Mhm.
children. And you see the children who grew up with an alcoholic parent. You see the damages and you see the styles, you see the how they interact and how they treat themselves and how they live. They were the
Mhm.
parent most of the time, and so they
Mhm.
didn't get a
Right, yeah.
childhood. They didn't get a chance to grow up many times. So I'm very familiar with that. It's interesting that you saw reparented like out of nowhere, just kind of this flash of this bizarre word that no
Yeah,
one would
I
think
really have
of.
no idea. Maybe somebody said it, I don't have any recollection, but I remember thinking that seems like the thing that would be helpful to me. Because once I got in CODA, it was clear I have behavior patterns that are not serving me, and they had to come from somewhere? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's it. The childhood thing is so
Mhm.
powerful.
Yeah.
But you talk about, the plethora of things that you were doing to yourself, the
Mhm.
smoking, the
Mhm.
drinking, the drugs, the overeating like that. At some point when you were fortunate enough to stop and step
Mhm.
back, a lot of people don't make it
Mhm.
through a lot of that stuff.
Mhm.
But,
Mhm.
stop overgiving, take themselves seriously,
Mhm.
and build internal safety. And I just keep coming back to the safety part because
Mhm. Mhm.
I think a lot of times we bury ourselves in either food or
Mhm.
drugs or alcohol or
Gambling
repeated
or
crash
sex
and
or
burn
debt or shopping.
relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the relationship thing of chasing that relationship to find that safety. This person is going to make me feel safe. This is the one that's going to be different than all the others.
Mhm.
But it's not because you keep selecting the same type of people. So how did you start? You found yourself, you
Mhm.
reparented, you worked on your diet, you worked on that.
Mhm.
So how did you start controlling these things from doing what they're doing to your life?
Yeah. Well, one day at a time. I mean, that's the probably the most popular slogan in 12-step recovery, but I did it one day at a time, one thought at a time.
Besides the
Right.
serenity
Right,
prayer.
yeah. One sentence at a time, one boundary at a time, one meal at a time. So I wanna talk about boundaries because 'cause that's been the biggest effect on me, but Gary, I really learned how to build boundaries vicariously through the 12 steps of recovery. Nobody sat me down and was like, "Okay, Barb, we're gonna learn how to build boundaries." I learned how to do a lot of things all at one time, like one day at a time, and I didn't even know that I was building boundaries when it started. I didn't understand that was what I was doing, and a couple years into my recovery journey, it was really clear that I have boundaries now, and I was astonished at how amazing it was. So I decided, well, let me do some reading about boundaries. And what it did was help me to retroactively understand not only what happened to me such that I didn't develop healthy boundaries, but also what happened to me such that I was building boundaries. So it helped me to explain. And then while I was doing the reading, like, the books were all a bunch of words, and so I was drawing these visual depictions of this if this was in the physical world, what would this look like? Because I'm a visual person, which I kinda didn't even know, which is crazy because I have always been a very introspective person, but those drawings turned into handouts, which ultimately turned into a workbook, which turned into the backbone of my boundaries coaching program. But I didn't know any of that was going to happen. I was working full time at Yale University as a program coordinator, primarily doing college access programs when I got into recovery. For my first 2.5 years, I was in recovery. I was still working at Yale. And I just like the first time that I set a boundary that I knew this is me setting a boundary that I can remember was I had this ex-boyfriend who was emailing me, and I was at work, and for some reason, I went into my personal email, and he had emailed me. And prior to that, if that had happened, I would have opened up the email immediately, blamed him for interrupting my day, even though I'm the one that opened the email, and then I would have felt compelled to respond to it immediately and at length. And I actually needed to be told by the women in my step group, "Barb, you don't have to respond to his email." Now, Gary, I am not a dumb person, but I needed to be told that I don't have to respond to it. So I finally started going, "Oh, I don't have the psychic space to deal with this right now." Never mind the fact that I'm at work and I'm not supposed to be doing personal emails, right? Never mind that, right? So it took me probably a couple of years after that before it even occurred to me that I could block him. Like it just wasn't even in my consciousness. Like this is how insidious this codependent illness is, that things that are really like I'm telling you, I had to be told as a 50-something-year-old intelligent woman who is a professional, you don't have to open that email. Like it's really sad, but it's like I have so I think of to me, one way to understand codependence is almost like it's an addiction, but it's an addiction to people. It's not addiction to a substance like alcohol or drugs or, sugar or something like that. I don't think that's exactly accurate, but I think it's a good metaphor for that. So, and the freedom that resulted when I started setting boundaries was absolutely incredible that I didn't have to go in the middle of my workday and have this big bomb blow up in the middle of my workday, right? I got to go, I don't have time for that right now, or I don't have the psychic space for that right now. And I get to move on and eventually never read anything from him ever again, but at least for some time it was read it when I had the capacity and then also not respond immediately. That was another thing, the idea that I would pause before doing something, which speaking of which, pausing number one tool of recovery. I can't employ any of the other tools that I learned without pausing. Now, learning to pause was monumental for me because I was told pause and I'm like, excellent idea. I have no idea how to do that. And it took me months. So here's what happened. I did a thing and like 3 weeks later, I was like, oh, that would have been a good time to pause. And then another while later, I did a thing and like a week later, I was like, "Oh, that would have been a good time to pause." So I started seeing the time closing, the window of time closing between when I did a thing that I could have paused and I realized it and I started to get excited. I'm like, "Oh my God, maybe I'm actually gonna know ahead of time to pause." And that's eventually what happened. But it's not like, okay, then I started pausing and I paused forever. No. I paused and then I forgot and I forgot and I paused and I paused and I forgot and I paused and I forgot and I forgot and I paused and I paused and I paused. And now I almost have like a built-in pauser. I don't really have to think about it now. I just know because the way I think of it, Gary, is that the boundary of pausing has become integrated into my very being. It's part of who I am. And speaking of that, I talk about boundaries in many ways. Like I love the words you used before, like authenticity and that sort of thing. But it's become part of my identity. My identity, among many other things, is I am woman who pauses. Whereas I was woman who was reactive before. I reacted to everything around me. And I didn't know that I wasn't being proactive. I was just really being reactive. And this takes back to the actually I was going to the trauma I mentioned. I don't know that I mentioned that. So ACA is the way I describe it, it's a trauma recovery program where you reparent yourself and you use the 12 steps to recover. Well, the intergenerational family dysfunction, which results in childhood trauma, is the thing that caused me to not really know where do I end and other people begin because of how I grew up. Now, my main trauma was emotional abandonment, which is that's the case for everybody in ACA. Some people are also physically abandoned, but all of us are emotionally abandoned. And this is not to blame our parents and say that they're horrible people. Of course, some of them are horrible people, most of them aren't, but they don't know how to be emotionally supportive and available to their children because nobody taught them how to do it. And so my trauma was what I call sort of like the drip, drip, drip of emotional invalidation over the course of my life. It also included gaslighting. My parents would say, "This is the kind of family that we are." No, we're not. Or we don't do that in this family. It's like, yes, we do. So, another saying in recovery, we're as sick as our secrets. Well, I figured out when I was like 10 that my dad was cheating on my mom. And if I'm 10 and I know it, my mom knows it. We're not talking about it. And then my mom secretly smoked cigarettes, which she colluded with me and my brothers against my dad about it. And then what did I do later? I secretly smoked cigarettes for 20 years. And, you know, secretly smoking cigarettes is not like gambling or running a whorehouse, but it's sick behavior to hide something and to get your children to first of all, pretend to your children it's not happening. Like, I remember this one time, my mom would smoke in the bathroom of her and my dad's room, and my brother went in there into her room one time, and he goes, "It smells like smoke in here," and she said, "No, it doesn't. That's the bathroom spray." Like, hello, we know what smoke smells like. But this is our mom telling us, "No, it's not, it's bathroom spray." And if that's what I remember, what else did we get gaslit about that we don't remember, right? So that stuff
But Barb, everybody knows what's happening with someone. It's like an alcoholic who sneaks off at lunch
Mhm,
to have 10
mhm.
martinis as
Right,
if no one's gonna know they snuck off
right,
to have,
right.
or a meth addict who will
Mhm,
leave the office
mhm,
every 15 minutes to go to
mhm,
their car and take another hit of the pipe,
mhm.
as
Right,
if no one notices that they
right,
haven't come back
right, right.
completely different. You can't you might be able to delude yourself thinking that no one knows that I'm doing
Mhm,
all these things, but
mhm.
everybody knows that you're
Right.
doing all these
Right,
things.
but the problem when you're a child is, first of all, you're a child. You don't even understand how the world works. And then the authority figures of your life, your parents, are lying to you. So you don't know what's real and what's not. And they also, like, I understood. We're not going to be talking about this. Nobody told me we're not talking about this. I absorbed the message. Do not talk about this stuff. And that brings me to one of the things we say in ACA is the top 3 dysfunctional family rules are don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. And for me, the don't talk rule mainly manifested in don't ask questions. Like, you're just supposed to know stuff. I don't care if you're 5, figure it out, and you better not be wrong. And so I was super defensive my entire life because I would make educated guesses about what something was or how to do something. And then the idea of being wrong was so threatening to me that I would like defend my made up answer like it was handed down to me from God because I wasn't allowed to be wrong, in my family. Like, being dumb was, like, the worst thing in my family, and it was just like, "I don't care if you're 5 or you're 7, you better figure this out, and you better know how to do stuff." I remember when I was in my late 20s, I worked in this restaurant, and this boss goes, "Do you always have to have an answer for everything?" And I remember thinking, "Yeah, don't you?" Like, yes, I had to have an answer for everything. I wasn't allowed to say, "I don't know," It just
Well, there's this weird need to be right. There's this
y and
weird need
right,
to be
right.
right,
I
and
remember as an adult in my probably 30s, maybe 40s, I don't know. I was in a spiritual sharing circle for, like, 10 years in this church, and there was a guy in there who was a longtime AA guy, and he was always dropping these gems from AA, many of which I didn't know what they meant, and he said, "Would you rather be right or would you rather be happy?" And I remember thinking, "I'd rather be right," and now I'd rather be happy, He also said
there's a real need though for
yeah,
people and,
yeah,
who have that upbringing.
right.
There's so much to that, what you said. I mean, first of all, you just don't need to fight every battle. You just gotta let that go.
But
You
when you're
don't
a
need to fight every
kid, you
battle.
feel like your very
I
survival is at
I
stake.
understand,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and like we talked about at the very beginning, when you're a kid and there's so many different things that you are feeling, like you named most of them, right? But there's shame, there's
Mm,
guilt, there's neglect,
God, yeah.
there's confusion.
Oh,
I've
yeah,
got no
absolutely.
freaking idea how this is supposed to work because
Right.
they're adults. I know intuitively in my own soul they're not acting right,
Mhm.
yet they're telling me that this is the way I have to act because
Right.
this is the way they want me to. When
Mhm.
I know in my
Mhm.
soul
Mhm.
this isn't right. So you have these inner fights that you have to do. I
Mhm.
love the pause and react,
Yeah.
the pause react because I'm
Yeah.
a fly out of my pie hole thing. If I think it, I say it.
Yeah.
So I love the pause react. But what I've started working on is rewiring my negative thought. So if I'm going to
Mhm.
say something negative
Mhm.
and it's going to come flying out, I'm able to stop it and say, well, what I meant to say was, even though I hadn't said it yet,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
but what I meant to say was, I'm
Yeah.
really grateful for this fact that you bumped into my car and dented the back of it. And I'm so grateful I get to go to the auto repair.
Yeah.
But the self-talk, we just,
Yeah.
it's such a wicked thing, especially when you've got all of these things that are bubbling up from the past.
Mhm. Yeah. I'd like to pick up on this. You said, like, we need to be right. What that is ultimately about is safety. Right? We need to be right because we feel like if I'm not right, I'm gonna die. Because when you think about it, when you're children, like, we're animals, right? The animal kingdom, the baby animals know if the adult animals die, I'm dead. So on a like cellular level, we know I need my adults around me to be okay with me. And so I got the message, you better be right because it's not going to be emotionally safe for you. But we take it as like physically, like I'm going to die. So, pretty much the things we do, we seek safety in the outside world. So, when we want prestige, it's because, or we want prestige, or we want like the big, the title, the corner office, the certain pocketbook, the certain car, the certain type of shoes, the certain neighborhood, the certain reputation. It's all about what other people think of us because the worst thing you can do to a human is ostracize them. We don't want to be abandoned. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be ridiculed. We don't want to be rejected. So we seek safety in the outside world, in those things I name, but also in relationships with other people. Like, if they like me, then I will be safe. And what I've learned is that building healthy boundaries is about creating a sense of internal safety because you cannot create internal safety in the external world. So, but when we're completely focused on the external world, we're seeking safety, which is fleeting. It might be there, but it's not guaranteed, and you can't hold on to it because the other person could, who knows what could happen. You know, you could get laid off from your job, your car could get hit, your spouse could divorce you. You know, the who knows, what could happen. But I actually had this epiphany last year, and I think it was while I was guesting on another podcast that creating boundaries is about creating a sense of internal safety. It was a thing I had been sort of swimming around and had never named before, but once I named it, it helped me retroactively understand everything I know about boundaries and about my recovery. So when I say internal safety, I don't mean you are calm 100% of the time. I don't mean that you never have problems. I don't mean you never have difficulty. I don't mean that you're never uncomfortable. Over time, you will have way less difficulty and you will have way less discomfort. But what it means is that you don't abandon yourself because of what other people are thinking or doing. So, what many of us do, like let's say I set a boundary with you, Gary, and you get really upset with me. In the past, I would take my boundary back because I can't have you being upset with me. I would take your upsettedness as a signal that I've done something wrong and I need to fix it right now. Well, that's me abandoning myself and what I know is right for me, which would be the boundary that I set with you. So, building internal safety is building the capacity to withstand the discomfort and not abandon yourself just for someone else's approval or their lack of disapproval. It means if I set a boundary and I start to feel guilty, in the past, what I would do is use that guilt to mean I've done something wrong, I'm a bad person, and I need to clean that up. And what I now understand is it's not an instruction. Guilt is not an instruction. Take back what you did. You've done something wrong. It's a feeling typically way out of proportion, maybe even completely inappropriate to the situation. But it's because I'm changing my identity. I'm going from woman who helps everybody else at all costs, at all times identity to I am woman who now is like, is this really working for me? Is this okay with me? Is this not okay with me? So that discomfort is the discomfort of growth. It's not the discomfort of dysfunction. And I want to talk about that for a moment because the discomfort of dysfunction is you have this dysfunctional pattern you've been engaging in probably for decades. It's probably going to get worse over time. It's never ending unless you do something drastic. And then there's the discomfort of growth. And the reason it's uncomfortable is because it's foreign. You don't know that way of being. It feels completely off to you. But the reality is, if you keep engaging in the new behavior, it's no longer going to be uncomfortable. It's no longer going to be unfamiliar. It's going to become comfortable and the discomfort will end. And guess what's on the other side of the discomfort of growth? Healing and peace and serenity. So you're going to have discomfort. Which one do you want? The never ending, getting worse one or the finite one that has healing on the other side? So that's why I say when you tolerate the discomfort, it's not tolerate the discomfort of dysfunction. And then the other thing about this is that this is nervous system level stuff. Your nervous system and your brain are interpreting whatever's happening at the moment in a couple of ways that are not accurate. One, they're acting like you are in a cave and there's a saber-toothed tiger that just came in and it's going to kill you. That's evolutionary. But two, whatever is happening to you in the moment is not life-threatening. But your body is acting like it because your nervous system and your brain, your mind have not been updated from childhood when things felt like I'm going to die if my parents don't, whatever, take care of me, approve of me, whatever. So I think about it like this. I have these fault lines in my body that resulted from trauma, and something happens in my day to day life that sort of like nicks the fault line and it causes this reverberation like an earthquake through me. I think that it's What's happening to me is the thing that happened as a child that created the fault lines in the first place, the abandonment mood, the repeated, like, emotional drip, drip, drip of emotional validation, but it's not. It's somebody saying, "That doesn't work for me," and me going like, "Oh my god, I'm a horrible person," right? So we're acting like that original event is happening right now, but it's not. So we get to update our nervous system and our minds by creating a sense of internal safety. The problem for people like me with codependence is you can't create internal safety by focusing externally. And when you're constantly seeking safety in the outside world, and you're still not getting it, I mean, you might get it momentarily here and there, then the idea that you would come in here is just insane. So I coach so many women who they know what to say. They know what they should stop doing. They know what they should start doing. They can't make themselves do it. And it's because they can't handle the discomfort. And so learning how to build healthy boundaries is many things. It includes getting to know yourself, like what's okay and not okay with me? What do I want, like, need, prefer? Where do I end and other people begin? And then acting on that knowledge, figuring out like what matters to me. Like the way I have been working for years with my clients is I have them start out doing an exercise where they come up with their top 5 values. And it's not just this is the title. It's like what is the word, how do you describe it? How do you understand that? And then why does it matter to you? And then they use those values as sort of like anchors or guardrails or guideposts for how to make decisions in their life and how to set boundaries because you are not abandoning yourself when you show up for your values. When you set boundaries to uphold, support, and promote things that matter to you, you are doing the opposite of abandoning yourself because those values bubbled up in you for a reason. They're part of who you really are. And so one way to help you get on the journey of creating internal safety is to focus on like what really matters to me, and it's also a lot easier to stand firm in something that matters to you than something you don't really care about. So if you say, my family is really important to me, and your boss says, I need you to come in on Saturday morning, and your kid's got a championship game, you're going to be like, not going to make it because my family's really important to me. He's only going to have one championship game. I can come in Saturday evening or Sunday or work extra on Friday, whatever, but not going to do it. Right. And it's a lot easier to stand firm in that when like, I got one kid who's going to be in a championship game on Saturday. That's never happening, or maybe it'll happen again, but like that championship game, that relationship with that kid. Like that's an example of how it makes it easier to stand by something when when it's really important to you.
You covered so many things there. I mean, abandonment goes both ways. You have the feel of abandonment that you're abandoning yourself, but also that deep fear of everyone leaves me,
Mhm, mhm,
because your parents divorced or your
mhm,
mom
mhm,
bailed on you
mhm.
or your dad
Right,
bailed on you, whatever, you didn't have that relationship. And so as you're chasing these crash and burn missions throughout life, you're chasing that person that won't leave,
right,
although you've already gone into the relationship setting it up that they're going to leave.
right.
And so it just keeps going over itself. And then,
Yeah.
also the loss of yourself in someone else, that's a
God,
tough
yeah.
battle too,
Yeah,
that you give up.
yeah.
You think it's helping the relationship
Right,
by giving up your soul, your
right.
person,
Yeah, that was me. I
for
was
someone
chameleon.
else's stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are the values that you're talking about. So I guess when you have people write these down, do you catch a value that you question them on because maybe
No.
it's not healthy?
No. No, they'll come up with that on their own. I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of my clients by the time we finish realize those weren't my real values, or not all of them were. And sometimes they're like people pleasy kind of values, like niceness is really important to me. Of course, niceness is important, but it's not core important. It was like that's what I think I should have. And what's interesting is the abandonment. Like, what I found, Gary, when I stopped abandoning myself, I stopped being so terrified of abandonment of other people, because guess what? I'm not. abandoned, and then I am a spiritual person, I have a higher power, so I'm not abandoning me, and my higher power is not abandoning me. So I don't want you to abandon me, but if you do, I can handle it. And, you said you've built it into the relationship. Here's how. When you're constantly abandoning yourself and you get in a relationship with someone, you've built abandonment into the relationship because you, the real you, is not really there. So, of course, it's not gonna work out, or maybe longevity-wise, it will, quote, "work out," you'll stay married, but you'll be miserable because you're not really there.
I get that. I get that. But the thing about the boundaries, I think, is it creates the healthiness. And so, how do you take these boundaries, which people think are standing off? People
Mhm,
think of boundaries as,
mhm,
I'm pushing you away, or I'm creating this barrier around
mhm,
myself. So how do you take these boundaries and create a healthy relationship
mhm.
by having boundaries?
Yeah, so, like, there could be people that you're pushing away. So I think you're bringing up one of the most common stereotypes about boundaries, which is that they're walls. But if you have a violent person in your life, you need a wall. So, like, a restraining order, that's a wall. You should have that. But 99.99999% of boundaries are not that. But that's what people tend to think of. So, boundaries, I learned who I am and what's okay and what's not okay. I'm now in the first and only healthy romantic relationship of my life. We've been together for 7.5 years. And I attribute my ability to be in that relationship primarily to my healthy boundaries because I know what's okay and not okay with me. And I let my sweetheart know that. I don't hold him accountable for things that I've never verbalized to him, which I did with every other person that I ever dated before. When something bothers me, I don't bottle it up and bottle it up and bottle up and then wait till I can't take it anymore and explode at him and blame him the way I did in every other relationship. I let him know as soon as it's reasonable. Like, this is a problem for me, or I this does isn't really working for me, or ouch, that really hurt. And what's wild is there's in the all of the 12-step recovery programs have a set of promises that they say once you go through recovery, you'll have them. Well, one of the promises in the AA Big Book is we will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And I would say that the place in my life in which that has most come true is in my romantic relationship because I say things that I'm like, I've never said anything like that. How did I know how to say that? And I think it's primarily because one, I know me really well. And two, I no longer lie. I tell the truth. The first time that I had, let's just call it difficulty with my sweetheart. We had been dating maybe 3 weeks, and I had invited him to come to an event with me. Now, I wanna just backdrop and say he has a chronic illness and has to manage his energy, and I have a calendar that's constantly full, and I do a lot of stuff, and I love that. So I invited him to come to this thing with me, and he didn't respond until 10 PM. I invited him on Monday, the event was on Tuesday at 6 PM. He responded on Tuesday at 10 PM. So I was not happy. And I texted him when I got his text and I said, "Can you help me tomorrow talk to you about this? Because I'm really feeling unsettled about the fact that you didn't respond until 10 PM." And he was like, "Absolutely." I don't know how I knew to ask him to help me, but what I've learned, at least like my experience now, is that at least heterosexual men actually really like being asked for help from their women partners. Maybe it's true for all men, but I don't date gay men, so I don't know. And so when we sat down the next day, I said, "Listen, I am looking at this conversation as an opportunity for us to grow in intimacy, and I hope you do too." So I framed it. I've never said anything like that before. I don't know how I knew how to say it. And so I said, "I'm really feeling unsettled about the fact that you didn't respond until 10 PM." He goes, "Well, when you say you feel unsettled, what do you mean by that?" I go, "I don't know. That's as accurate as I can get. It doesn't feel right. It didn't sit right with me." And as we talked, I said, prior to that, you've been very responsive to me. You have responded within a matter of hours, not 36 hours, but in the same day." And the more we talked about it, the more he realized. First, he said to me, "I kind of assumed that not responding was a response." And I was like, Nope, that will not fly with me going forward. So a non-response is not a response, okay? And then he finally realized he doesn't wanna get sucked into my world. He's seen my calendar, and he's afraid if I go to her with this thing to her, she's gonna invite me to other things, and I'm gonna have to go, and then I'm gonna have to say no. But he didn't even understand that was what was going on until we processed it. And I have to say, Gary, I feel like that conversation with him literally laid the foundation for my relationship with him because it was our first conflict and we addressed it immediately. Nobody blamed anybody that they did anything wrong. I was like, "This is an opportunity for us to grow in intimacy." And he was like, "Absolutely." Now, this is a man who was married for 10 years and then for 25 years. And to hear him tell it, they were not high quality marriages. But what's interesting is I realized that this man also had really healthy boundaries because it probably took him 3 years into our relationship before I got the full story on each one of those relationships. I had never dated a man that did not just constantly bash the previous women in his life. And he never did any of that. He told me facts. He also said things like, "I wasn't a very good husband. I wasn't very communicative. I worked a lot." And I was like, "Who is this man?" So he also was in recovery too. So clearly, he had changed and was able to like own his own behavior. But like those are examples of what it's like to be in a healthy relationship or to start off to create a healthy relationship. But I didn't even like, I intuitively knew how to handle situations which used to baffle me because I'm a different person. I know who I am. I know what's okay and not okay. I know how to communicate. And I learned how to communicate by setting boundaries. So, this having healthy relationships is really possible when you have healthy boundaries. And, people think if I have healthy boundaries, I'm going to lose people. You might. If you lose them, they're probably unhealthy relationships. But what really happens is for healthy people, you get closer to them because you're starting them to tell them the truth about who you are and what's okay and what's not okay. And that means you start becoming more genuine, more authentic with them, which is how we create vulnerability, which is how we create intimacy. You cannot have intimacy without vulnerability. And it's hard to be vulnerable when you're constantly pretending that you think things or feel things that you don't.
I want to get into before we get out of here. I want to get into your program that you're doing, your boundaries program. But I just have a quick question. I kind of want to shift for a second because I think it'll help people too.
Mhm.
You've have you left Yale? Are you full time
Yeah,
doing
no,
your
I work
coaching
for
and all this stuff?
myself. I've been gone from Yale for 9 years. Yeah.
So my
So I've been in
question is, I
recovery
mean,
for 11
when
years. Yeah.
11 so when did you, because a lot of people, speaking of boundaries and speaking about changing things and leaving things, when did you say to yourself, I'm not flourishing here. I've found my purpose and
Nope,
I
that's
want
not
to
what happened.
follow this.
I got laid
So
off.
how did you end up doing what you're doing? How'd you
Yeah.
leave a great set
Yeah.
job and go do what you're doing now? That's
Yeah.
scary. There's
I
a lot of
love
fear on that.
Yeah, I love to tell this story. So I got laid off. That's how it happened. I had
The
worked, but
Okay.
I had been grant funded for years. But when I got laid off, I immediately, through a series of serendipitous events, found my way into the world of innovation, startups, and entrepreneurship in New Haven and at Yale. Started doing a lot of networking. Kept applying for jobs, couldn't find a job, and then whatever, I won't go into any of the details, but I decided to start my own business. And I was like, I'm just going to be just like a general life coach. No, it wasn't about boundaries or anything. But as I got further into my journey of entrepreneurship, I realized you have to have a niche. And it just made sense for me to be a boundaries coach because, my core wound is codependence. And they had such an impact on me that I became a boundaries coach. I also started my podcast in March of 2019. So I now have 350 something episodes. So, when I told you that it was my micro version of my story, it is because I have 350 podcast episodes that I talk about this all the time. But I started the podcast Fragmented to Whole Life Lessons from 12-Step Recovery, not thinking it would have anything to do with my business. For me, it was entirely about carrying the message of recovery to those who still suffer because I got into recovery and I'm like, I learned like 50 bajillion things about myself, none of which ever came up in any of that other, 37 years of therapy and all that self help. And so I was like, there's all this wisdom and recovery. I want to get it out there into the world. Now, the number one way that I get clients is from my podcast because when they get on a call with me, they're like, I feel like I know you. And I go, do you listen to my podcast? And they say yes. And I'm like, then you do, because I'm 100% genuine on my podcast. So I started coaching on boundaries. I developed my own multimedia curriculum. I am super proud of this. I finally just this week launched my first internal safety course. It's called Boundaries That Hold. Stop overriding yourself in real time. You can find that on my website. So my website is higherpowercc.com. That's because my business is called Higher Power Coaching and Consulting. So if you go to higherpowercc.com/boundaries that hold, you will find the course. So as we're recording, my battery is running very low. It is June 16th, and I am doing something called early access enrollment, where if people enroll now, the course is going to be fully out in August. They get a massive discount. They get some assets right away, and about 3 to 4 weeks after the course launches, they get to have a 1 hour Q&A call with me and all the other people. So now would be a good time, but even if this is after that and you're hearing it, that course will still be there, and then listening to my podcast would be great, and then if people are really looking for deep transformation, my flagship program is called Unshakable You. It's a 12-week program where I throw everything I got at you. So I have a multimedia curriculum, and I help you work on your specific situations, issues, etcetera, and your relationships. And literally 100% of my clients have had massive transformations as a result of that work.
I love that, and your battery's going, so I've gotta ask you my last question before we get out of here, and if your
Okay.
battery dies before you answer, well, then that's just the way
Okay.
it's supposed to be. But before we go, I asked you one question, but my last question is, if you wanna leave us with a message, a thought, a quote, I have that one quote from you that I love from Prentice Hemphill.
Yes.
His quote is amazing.
Mhm.
Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me at the same time. I
Yeah.
love that. So you can't use that one. So if there's
Okay.
a thought you'd like to leave us with
Yeah. Yeah.
before we sign off today, what would that last thought be for us?
Yeah, and I think it's two things that I've already said. One, discomfort doesn't mean danger, and you can't create internal safety by focusing externally. You just can't. You have
What
to
was the
focus internally.
what was the last one?
The first one was discomfort does not mean danger. And the second one was you can't create internal safety by focusing externally.
Wow, is that 100% true? And boy, do some people need to hear that one. So,
Yeah.
guys, before her battery dies, I just want to thank Barb Nangle. Nangle? Nangle.
Nangle. Yeah. Thank you so much,
She's the
Gary.
boundaries coach, speaker, author, and host of the Fragmented to Whole podcast. She spent 40 years in therapy. She went into her own recovery at 52 years old. Now, she coaches people on boundaries to become turning point that transform her relationship, and she today helps professional women stop overgiving, take themselves seriously, and build the internal safety needed for a healthy, sustainable boundaries. And basically, that hurricane of stuff hour that we just got doesn't even scratch the surface
Right.
of Barb. So one more time, Barb, where can people find you? Where can they get more Barb if they want to?
Well, since they're already listening to your podcast, they can hop on over to mine, Fragmented to Whole, or they can go to higherpowercc.com. I've got tons of stuff on there. And then I really only use LinkedIn now. So I'm at Barb Nangle. I used to post on Facebook and Instagram. So there's still content there, but I'm not participating there anymore.
Cool, Biz. All right, kiddo, you were amazing. This is
Thank
everything I'd
you.
hoped it would be.
Oh,
Guys,
goody.
please go check out Barb because we all need to set some boundaries, don't we, kiddo?
Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right. I
We'll see
appreciate
you.
you. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.